Okay, I think we will get started. My name is Chelisea, and I am a study abroad advisor here at UW-Stout's Office of International Education. Today, I will be joined by Liz Julian, a career counselor at UW-Stout's Office of Career Services. And later on, we're lucky enough to be joined by several Stout students who are study abroad alumni. Before we get into the session, I'd like to cover just a few housekeeping items. First, we are recording this session, so if you are uncomfortable with that, please feel free to check back on our Canvas page for this fair because we will be recording it and uploading the video for you to watch at a later time. Second, if you have questions, that's wonderful. Please feel free to type them into the chat or wait until a little bit later in the session and you can turn on your microphone or your camera and ask them directly. Finally, please do keep yourself on mute until the question portion of the session so that we can preserve the sound quality for everyone here. So with that, we'll be talking about what study abroad can do for you in this session. To do so, Liz and I will be sharing some data-based findings on the benefits of study abroad and pulling from our experiences working with other Stout students. After that, we'll have our study abroad alumni panel to hear about how their study abroad experience impacted them. And we'll have a healthy amount of time towards the end of the session for any questions that you might have. So just as there are so many reasons that students choose to study abroad, so too are there's so many different types of benefits that an individual might receive from studying abroad. I'd like to share just a little bit of my own background as an example. I am from a very small town just south of Eau Claire called Oliva, and I went to UW Green Bay as an undergrad. And before my sophomore year, I decided to kind of put myself outside of my comfort zone, and I did a 5-week-long Spanish immersion in San Sebastian, Spain. And I ended up loving it so much that I applied for a scholarship so that I could pay for a second study abroad experience. I went on a faculty-led program to Greece and Turkey in my junior year. It ended up not being quite enough for me. I had gotten the travel bug. So after graduation, I decided to volunteer for 2 years as a member of the United States Peace Corps program in the Philippines. And that experience solidified my passion even more. And so I came back and did a master's in international development. And for about 15 years, worked in the field of international development, both in the United States and abroad. I ended up marrying a United States diplomat, and for that reason, we ended up moving every couple years to different countries. So I have lived about in 7 countries and traveled to 50. So for me, the impact of a decision that I made as an undergrad to study abroad had huge implications for me personally, academically, and professionally. And that's what we see from so many of our students. In terms of personal benefits, of course, it does vary by the individual, but there are some commonalities. Many people view study abroad as an experience of a lifetime, something that they will look back on forever and never quite be able to replicate after they graduate, get a job, perhaps start a family, etc. And so that certainly is true. It's something that we hear again and again. Many other people feel that it's a chance to meet people from many different walks of life, especially for those of us perhaps who have grown up in this area and gone to school in this area. It's a chance to really see an entirely different world and to meet different people. Another benefit, personal benefit, is to gain confidence. Like I said, I wanted to kind of put myself outside of my comfort zone. And we hear from a lot of students who want to do that. And they choose destinations that are very, very different from what their home environment is. There was actually a study of about 3,500 study abroad participants over 50 years that they were asked about their personal growth from study abroad. 97% said that studying abroad served as a catalyst for increased maturity. 96% said they reported increased self-confidence. 89% said it enabled them to tolerate ambiguity. And 95% said that it had a lasting impact on their worldview. Many students also have goals that they have set for themselves and want to achieve them through study abroad. Anything from a travel bucket list to exploring their heritage, for example, seeking to study in a country where maybe their ancestors originally came from, or exploring their identity in a different cultural context. So these are just some of the personal benefits that we see again and again. There are more, but our focus today will be more on the academic and professional benefits. The first benefit that perhaps goes without saying is that students can take classes that transfer back to Stout. But actually, we get quite a few questions about this. I want to explain that as part of your application process to go abroad, you complete a form, the proposal for transferred credits, where you identify the courses that you wish to take while abroad. And you have to go and meet with your program director for your major, your minor advisor if you have one, and the transfer coordinator. And by the time you're done with that process, you know exactly how those courses are going to transfer back and count towards your degree here at Stout. Some students also want to use study abroad to take courses that are not available at Stout. Here at Stout, we have some very unique course offerings. What comes to mind is some of our plastics and engineering courses or our Gulf Enterprise Management courses. Similarly, there are universities around the world that have very unique offerings. And so this is a chance for you to take some very different courses that will still count towards your degree here. Yet other students are interested in taking classes with internationally renowned institutions or instructors. Certainly, we carefully choose the universities with which we partner, and many of them are very well recognized in their own country, in their region, and even in their country. So this is a chance for you to learn with the best of the best. Another academic benefit is helping to find a direction for your academic path. Taking courses at another university can help you see your major from a different perspective. And I know for myself personally, I went abroad as an environmental science major, and I came back and made a slight switch because of the experience I had. And I also added a humanistic studies minor because of my newfound interest in languages. Another academic benefit is to learn through a different style of education. One thing we hear often from students is that they're sort of surprised at this different style of education. For example, those of our students who study in Europe often talk about how the courses there leave students to learn very independently, that they might have just one or two big projects or one or two big exams and don't have smaller projects or assignments or midterms. And that's quite different from the style that we typically have in the United States. And so it stretches students. And I think with our emphasis here at UW-Stout on career readiness, it actually really sets you up to succeed outside of the university, where, of course, you have to be ready to work very independently. Another benefit is to give real-life context to classroom learning. So imagine studying world history and then going to the Roman Colosseum, or studying art history and going to the Louvre in Paris, or studying world religions and going to Buddhist temples in Thailand. We hear from a lot of students that they specifically are looking for that type of experience where their in-classroom learning is complemented by what they're experiencing outside the classroom. Another benefit that we see in data of studies of study abroad participants is an increase in your GPA and improved academic performance. In several studies, we saw that although GPAs tend to increase as you get closer to graduation, students who studied abroad saw their GPAs rise twice as quickly as those who did not study abroad. Another benefit is to improve your graduation rate and even perhaps fast track your graduation. Another study showed that study abroad participants were found to be more likely to graduate than those who did not participate, anywhere from 15% more likely all the way up to nearly 40% more likely. Not only that, but they tend to graduate in the 4 or 5 year range instead of some of our longer periods of time. And finally, for those students who are interested in going to grad school, we see another study that shows that study abroad participants achieve a 90% placement rate in their first or second choice grad schools. So there really are so many different academic benefits to studying abroad. But now I'm going to turn it over to Liz to talk about the career benefits.
Thank you for being here today, everyone. So one of the things we do in career services is we pay attention a lot to what employers want. And so there's a survey that goes out every year, and they ask employers to rank their top skills. And it is ranked. So this is the list I like to use a lot. So in order, the number one is verbal communication, and then all the way down through the last one, which is ability to sell or influence others. I like to bring this up for a couple different reasons. Number 7 is where technical knowledge related to the job, so basically your major, your work experience, which implies to me that basically 1 through 6 are things you can learn in a lot of different scenarios, right? It's not necessarily something related to specifically what you want to be doing. All of these can be learned in a lot of different places. So that's great because that gives you study abroad to learn these skills, involvement, other work experiences, on-campus jobs. Can we go to the next slide? So students share what they feel they've learned, and so that's the list on the left there. So communication is explicitly on there, problem solving, course or major related knowledge, I'd say that's technical knowledge. Teamwork is specifically there. And can you go to the next slide as well? And then the ones that I went ahead and starred, like curiosity, flexibility, adaptability, I would make the argument that these fit into a lot of those skills too. They just don't necessarily fit as one-to-one. But a lot of what I do in career services is helping communicate those skills in a way that an employer is going to understand. So maybe we don't want to talk as much about curiosity, but I know how curiosity goes into processing information and making decisions. All of that builds up to those skills. Go to the next slide. So some of those benefits, obviously, those skills that employers really want, soft skills, they are often called. It gives you something to add to your resume. So that's really a great thing. And I see students who do that in a variety of formats. So that's a really good time to talk to career services if you're not sure how to put it on your resume. It does help you distinguish yourself from your peers. It is something that employers can notice. And then if you are looking to learn a foreign language, obviously this is a great opportunity to do that or improve upon it. Language wasn't necessarily a skill that employers looked at, but that was just the top 10. If you are in a field where a language is important, you're going to know that, and that's obviously going to be a much bigger benefit for that employer. And I do think it improves employability with employers throughout the US. 75% of employers do seek a global perspective of applicants. Again, that wasn't on that ranking list, but when you see the full list, it is there. I think it's harder for employers to articulate that, but 23 million US jobs are tied to international trade. So it's more and more important that you understand the larger context. And then you can set yourself up for an international-based career or education if that's what you're interested in. Like Chayla mentioned, it really influenced her career choices because of study abroad. It can also increase your base salary. So the Stout average at graduation across all majors is about $44,000 as their entry-level salary. Study abroad participants earn about $7,500 more a year. So a pretty significant portion for those who did study abroad. Okay. We're going to do Q&A time here, or we're going to go right into the panel? Sorry.
I think we should do the student panel.
Okay. So if we go to, so we're gonna turn things over to our panel next. So we have these 4 individuals joining us here today. To start, we're gonna let themselves introduce themselves, but there is some information up on the screen. I'm gonna put Monica on the spot to start first, but can all of you take the time to briefly tell us about your study abroad experience? Where did you go, and what did you do, and when did you go?
Sure. So I'm Monica. Hello. I ended up studying abroad in the summer of 2018 for about a month. It was about 4.5 weeks. So it was definitely a shorter experience, but I ended up going to Scotland and Ireland for the global perspectives in education. So for me, my study abroad experience was definitely something that I had wanted to do since my first year in college. I knew that was something that I had wanted to pursue at some point during my time at Stout. And I changed my program about 7 times while I was at school. So that was definitely something that set some certain things back. So while I was in Scotland, I actually figured out kind of a career change that I had wanted to do. So it was the summer after my junior year, so my 3rd year in Stout. And I changed my program so many times before that, and family consumer science education was what I ended up with. And I had been in family consumer science education while I was there in Scotland. At that point, I thought I wanted to teach middle school, high school students. And while we were in Scotland, we were able to go to different schools, a lot of them being like untraditional schools where it's more hands-on, which is my style of learning, partially why I went to Stout in the first place, just the fact that we have all of that hands-on learning there too. And so while I was at those schools, I realized that I didn't want to be a teacher, and I only had 1 semester left of school. So after I got back from my trip, I ended up actually completely thinking of a career switch. Did not end up getting my teacher certification, so I did not student teach. Somehow graduated in 3.5 years still, but ended up just more or less like Scotland, and that whole trip in Scotland and Ireland completely changed my entire perspective on what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, which sounds cheesy as heck, but it was true. And so the people that I was able to meet on that trip, as well as just like the experiences I was able to have within the career field that I thought I wanted to go into, helped me realize that I indeed did not want to be a teacher, but I still wanted to help people, which in turn led me to academic advising at a university. So it definitely was a career switch in a sense, but it was still within the same realm, which was kind of nice.
Great, thank you. Let's have Rebecca go next.
All right, hopefully my mic is working. So I graduated with a hotel restaurant tourism management program, and then I was also in some of the property management classes just as part of the HRTM program. And so I decided to kind of do that as my backup and got that as a double major. And so I was able to go to Spain with the wine and food pairing program with Professor D'Souza in the winter of 2016. So we landed in Barcelona, and we were able to have New Year's over there and got to celebrate with everyone. And then we flew out to Mallorca and got to study in one of the schools out there. And a few of our classes, some of their students joined us for some of their lectures that their professors came and sat in on. And so that was really cool to be able to just sit and talk with them and kind of test out my Spanish, which I understand a lot more than I can speak. So that was kind of fun to actually be able to hear it and be part of that culture. And we did a lot of lessons where we went out and we found a couple of the local markets, and we were able to make the food, be able to pair it. I've always been very big on baking and cooking, and so that was kind of getting into my forte of really getting to know not just the culture, but getting to know kind of those regional differences of you're not going to find the same like seafood and everything here as you would in Mallorca, Spain. So it's just, I've definitely seen kind of that difference, being able to go there was really cool. And it was a very short trip. It was only a couple weeks long, but it definitely changed how I looked at kind of what I was doing and really seeing like what's around you and kind of broadening kind of, I don't know if going outside more would be the right way to say it, but definitely going and exploring a little bit more than I would have originally. So that was definitely a good trip for me.
That's great. Thank you. Megan, would you go next?
Sure. All right. So I will try and lump it all together. But so I graduated with a major in graphic design and interactive media. I double concentrated in design and interactive media, and I ended up adding 2 minors after my study abroad trips. But I have a minor in applied foreign languages, which focused in German and Spanish, and then I also completed the Spanish minor. I did 3 separate study abroad trips over the course of my 5 years at Stout. I also worked at the study abroad office. Some people may have seen me there in 2019, but I studied for a full academic year. That was my first study abroad trip, was at the Hochschule Darmstadt in Darmstadt, Germany. I did a full academic year exchange 2016 2017. Then when I came back to Stout the following summer, I did a faculty-led trip to sort of catch up on some credits that I kind of got behind on. And I did a faculty-led trip with the visual language and design in Holland with Robert Freyer. And then after adding my Spanish minor, which was my very last thing that I did, I completed my Spanish minor in Mexico with the Interculturalism and Commerce in Oaxaca, Mexico with Spanish teacher. Why do I remember his name? With a Spanish professor. Yes, Kevin. And then that was last summer, 2019. I was in Oaxaca for 4 weeks. I was in the Netherlands for 2 or 3 weeks. I actually ended up going a little bit early so that I could go see some friends in Darmstadt, Germany. So I flew into Darmstadt instead of with the group. But yeah, I mean, I was in Darmstadt for a full year. A lot of crazy things happened. It was a really amazing experience. It kind of, I mean, as a lot of people say, it changed my life. But there are so many things that happened on that trip that I could never, ever repeat in my life. I traveled to 12, 13 countries. And every year since, I've, been able to go travel or do something. I mean, I'm currently in New York City, sort of because of my study abroad experiences and my international exposure. So, I mean, yeah, it was really a great experience. So that's kind of some of it.
Just touching the surface there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So last but not least, Jake, would you mind sharing?
No, definitely. So I graduated with a major in packaging, and I studied abroad the summer of 2016. It was about a 3-week trip to China where we went to Beijing, Guangzhou, and Hong Kong. And during the trip, we just got to see different manufacturing plants. We went to a Honda manufacturing plant. We went to a window manufacturing plant, and then one other plastic component plant. We also got to sit in on a lecture with some Chinese students at their local university in Guangzhou, which was really interesting hearing, a lecture and just seeing how they learned and toured their campus, just to see, similars and differences and cultures and things like that. And we also got to see a shipping yard, which really got my interest in supply chain and just how things move from basically, seaports to the U.S. With a lot of imports coming from China for manufacturing components. So overall, it was a great experience for me, and I got to cover a class for operation management area on my major, which I needed quite a few classes, so we got to cover one of them with this trip.
Thank you all. So next question. Looking back, how did your study abroad experience influence your career steps or choices? And Monica touched on this a bunch in her intro, so you don't if you have more to add, you can add more, but we're going to start with Rebecca.
So currently I work for Epic based out of Verona in Wisconsin. It's a very big, it's healthcare software that they do, but their campus is roughly 10,000 people that are based out of Verona, which right now everyone's, pretty much all of them are working from home, but I work in their culinary department, which we have roughly, it's just under 300 people that are employed for just culinary. And so it's helping out with, or at least for my role, I'm a steward. And so it's helping out with inventory, ordering, looking at sourcing for different products that we want to get in, menu writing, or at least helping the sous chefs and chefs menu write. So a lot of what I learned in my classes at Stout, as well as what we went over a lot of with like costing out menus and pretty much just kind of going over everything you would need to produce an entire meal, or an entire kind of just kind of the whole food service aspect of everything that we touched on in the wine and food pairing has gone a long way towards how I help with everything at Epic.
Great, thank you. Megan, would you mind sharing?
Yeah, so I mean, through a lot of my study abroad experiences, I learned a lot of things, but I think the biggest thing that I've learned that has, I guess, like helped me and benefited me in my career is just having a different perspective and respect for other people and other cultures. Like I said, I live in New York City. This city is a huge international hub of everything. But I also work for a company called Campus Groups. Actually, UW-Stout Connect is is our product essentially. So I'm a graphic designer for Campus Groups, but my team is actually very international. The company was founded by a French man who went to NYU Stern, and he has since hired quite a few French people. So I mean, half my team is from France, half my team is in France. Some of them are in New York, some are in San Francisco. But we have, I mean, an abundance of cultures within our own work space, and so being able to identify and respect like other cultures and their languages, and like just learn from them and grow with them has been really amazing. We have a lot of discussions about cultures and like because I have also a very different perspective coming from a very small, I mean, minuscule town in central Wisconsin. It was about 1,000 people. So my perspective in the team is really quite different from the majority of my coworkers. And so I think that was one of the biggest benefits I've learned over the years.
Great, thank you. And then Jake?
No, jumping off of what Megan said, it definitely, after going on the study abroad, it definitely solidified, my major in packaging, just because my current job works a lot with different companies out of China. So really getting to know their culture, understanding, their ways of working by touring different manufacturing plants, talking to different workers there really helped just for me in my, daily work, and knowing that, going in packaging, a lot of our suppliers probably will be based out of China. So it just let me be reassured that, that is something, I want to do, and I want to work with, their teams over there, and understanding the way they're working just to help me to know that, yeah, I chose the right major. If I never went on the study abroad, I think it definitely would have set me behind, like with my, in my major, just because I didn't really realize how frequently I would work with, suppliers over there. So having that exposure just really helped out progress myself in my job and my major.
Great, thank you. So this question is a little bit related, but what would you say is the biggest academic or professional benefit that you personally gained from the program? For instance, thinking back to those sort of skills slides, what skills do you think you gained from study abroad? And Monica, you can go.
Okay. I would say the biggest benefit that I personally got from the program was just, I don't know how to word this well. Basically just learning how to really listen to myself, and which sounds silly, but in general, you have very little distraction when you are studying abroad, at least in my experience. I didn't get an international phone plan, so I wasn't on my phone all the time like I was back here in the United States. I was only on my phone when we had Wi-Fi, and that was very scarce because we were not always in the city. And so just kind of figuring out how I work and how I handle pressure, especially when you're in a brand new place and you can't rely on Google Maps effectively to try to get places. When we were in Edinburgh, we took public transportation a lot, so having to figure that out coming from a smaller town just south of St. Cloud, Minnesota, I had never really experienced that before. I always avoided the bus systems, whereas in Scotland they were an integral part of the culture there. So you have to use them unless you want to walk everywhere, which was just as easy as well. But being able to, thankfully there wasn't a language barrier, which is great. They definitely have a very thick accent that takes time to pick up on. But just being able to kind of trust myself and rely on myself and really listen to my inner dialogue more or less, just to try to figure out what the next step is going to be, really think before you actually do something, I would say. So that forethought before making larger decisions is definitely something that I solidified on my time there in Scotland and Ireland.
Thank you. Jake, would you mind sharing?
Yeah, definitely. My biggest one would be more of a technical knowledge that I gained from a manufacturing standpoint with going into, that was my first experience going into manufacturing plants. So I was able to really take that into my jobs to help in my career, just being able to talk, whether it's, in an interview or basically once I started my job or my first job for the first time, I was able to pull in some of those experiences, seeing how the lines operate, seeing how the operators can influence different parts of the line and the manufacturing processes. So that would be a big takeaway that I got.
Great, thank you. Megan, would you go?
Sure. So, yeah, again, I've learned so many different things, but one of the bigger technical skills that I think I learned, and some people might know this, and I probably don't. Liz, you might know this, but I, while I was in Germany, had the opportunity to work with the European Space Agency and design a logo for an astronaut in Germany. And I think through that experience and many of my other experiences, I learned how to work with people from other cultures and sort of look back at myself and try and I guess make myself more understood by everybody that's around me with the language barrier. I mean, I studied in Germany, but I didn't know German until the day I got there. I had never left the country before. I had never even opened a German textbook until the day I landed in Frankfurt. And so over the course of that year there, I did pick up German, but there was still an initial language barrier. And so I had to learn how to communicate with people through language barriers. And again, in Oaxaca, my Spanish was not that great. So really learning how to communicate through those language barriers were really a really important technical skill that I learned. And I still do this to this day. I think out of all my coworkers, with the majority of our French team, some of my American coworkers actually struggle to understand the French team and their little nuances and broken English at times. And out of everybody, I'm the one who usually can piece together what it is they're trying to communicate and then word it so that the rest of the American team can understand what they're trying to say. But yeah.
Thank you. Then Rebecca.
Kind of going off of what they were all talking about, communication was a very big thing that a lot of people in Spain, they like to practice their English, and then they get super excited when they met people from the US. And a few of our people that were on the same trip as me had minors in Spanish, so they were getting excited that they could test out their Spanish and see kind of how they were doing. But then everyone, the majority of people that we met up with, wanted to test out their English. So it was kind of a lot of like phrasing and everything really played a role in trying to understand what the other person was going for. And then also just branching out and like really trying to figure out not just how to get around, but also figuring out, I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase it, but just kind of being immersed in that culture and really understanding that what you might think or what you might have read about where you are might be a little bit different from when you actually get there. And so everyone's experience is a little different, even if you go to the same place. So it's just really making sure you're kind of being present. What you guys were talking about before, like with the cell phones, like I also didn't have an international plan. So I pretty much just left my phone in the hotel, and I had a camera with me to take pictures if I wanted to. But it's really just kind of immersing yourself in that and trying to like really be present in what you're doing. It was a big thing for me.
I heard a lot of communication skills for sure. I'm going to kind of combine this question into two, and it's a nitty-gritty question. Do you add study abroad to your resume? And has it come up in interviews? Is it something you're asked about, or do you bring it up when you're answering questions? And I'll start back with Rebecca, so we're not in the same order every time.
Yes, I did put it on my resume. And so usually people that I was interviewing with would always kind of point it out and ask kind of similar questions to like what we're talking about now, is like kind of what did you learn from it, or like how do you think that will play a role in what you're doing with our company. So it was always kind of fun to talk about that, and they were always kind of excited to like ask about like, oh, you went to this other country, like I also went and visited X place or whatever. And so it was always kind of an interesting conversation when they would bring it up.
Great. Monica?
So I did not add it specifically to my resume, but I do bring it up in interviews if the opportunity presents itself. Largely they ask, well, now that I've changed from education more over towards like university advising and those sorts of roles, when I got this position that I'm currently at, I'm actually in Flagstaff, Arizona, working in their advising team. And so during this interview, I did bring it up when they asked about like different experiences that I had with like adversity or diversity and all of those sorts of things. And so being able to bring up being in a completely different culture really helped my chances, I would think, for sure, just because a large amount of the staff here is actually from in-state. So the fact that I'm from out of state is honestly pretty unique in itself. And so being able to have those different experiences that kind of set me apart from the rest of the applicants really helps.
Thank you. Jake, how about you?
Yeah, so I put it on my resume as well. And I would say in some interviews I was asked about, others I would bring it up and use it as a talking point to answer their questions. But I felt it was really beneficial to have on my resume just to pull in that experience I had, and especially for my first job, when I basically only had 2 co-ops to talk about. It gave something else to talk about and just showed some other activities I was involved in while at the university.
Yeah, great. How about you, Megan?
So since I did 3 programs, I don't include all of them on my resume. I mostly include my academic year in Germany on my resume, generally under education section, but I also, as a graphic designer, my resume is not the most important piece of my interview process. And so I don't know if I've ever explicitly been asked in an interview, somebody actually looking at my resume about study abroad, just because they don't, or at least in the experiences I've had so far. But I do include the project where I worked with the European Space Agency, the Horizons mission patch, in my portfolio, even though it's not one of my best designs, or like, I mean, in the end, it wasn't even my design that was chosen and went to space, but I still worked on the final design with the professor and the astronauts and the company and everything. But so I do include that in my portfolio, and people are always questioning it. They're like, what is this? Like, I'm so confused. Maybe I need to present it a little bit better, but it always brings up an interesting topic. And then I always pull in my study abroad experiences. And I think I reference my study abroad experiences a lot, just in general. I mean, in interviews for sure, and even in just in my daily life, because I have a few of them. And I learned a lot of different things in each one of those experiences. So I have a lot of things to pull from over my 13 months abroad at Stout. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, now we have time for some questions and answers, and that can be for myself or Chayla or any of the panel members, and you can unmute yourself if you would like to ask those, or you can type them in the chat and we will read them.
Well, as we wait for anybody who wants to ask a question, I'd like to jump in. Thank you all for being here. I found myself nodding my head through a lot of what you had to say. I had very similar experiences. One thing I wanted to ask is, you know, here at the Study Abroad office, we hear from a lot of students that although they might be interested in studying abroad, that cost is a concern and a barrier sometimes. So considering the cost of the program or the programs that you went on and what you gained, what would you say, you know, is your return on investment? And also, if you have any tips for students about how you actually ended up paying for your experience, would be very welcome. Anybody who wants to go can jump in.
I would say it's fully worth it no matter the cost. And if someone's worried about the cost, the summer and winter options are great ones to look at because they're usually a lot cheaper. But you also have to see, like, for me, instance, I went 3 weeks and I got it to count for 3 credits. And for me, I'm an out-of-state student too. So it definitely, you know, it offset, and it was definitely worth the little extra money and the valuable experience I gained, and helps to talk about it in future job interviews.
Thanks, Jake.
Kind of the same for me was that I went over the winter, so it was a little bit cheaper than doing a full-blown, like, either semester or year-long program. And then I also had applied for a scholarship for it, which I got kind of like a partial scholarship. It was awarded to 2 of us. And then the rest of it, I always had summer jobs and had saved up some money from that. And so was a little bit of that as well.
I would say it was similar for me as well. I was actually mostly on scholarship while I was at UW-Stout. I'm a first-generation student, so neither of my parents went to a 4-year university. So I was an RA for 2 years, so that helped with my housing, and then also just jobs the entire time and work study. So I didn't receive any specific scholarships for the trip itself, but like the others said as well, it was definitely more financially accessible to do a shorter trip for me personally. And that's how it just fit as well. So it worked out in that aspect, but it was definitely like 110% worth like all of the like finances that went towards it. The experience that you get back is completely worth the money that you pay, for sure. And then I think mine ended up being around $3,500, $4,000 possibly for the 4.5 weeks. And most of that is your international flight. So the fact that I was able to stay in 2 different countries, 3 different cities for, oh my gosh, maybe under 2,000, because at that point the international flight was a large portion of that, was an amazing deal. You can't do that on your own. So being able to have those like group rates and everything like that was very worth it.
I'm going to speak about that as well. So obviously I studied abroad multiple times, and the cost is a huge concern. I am also a first generation student. I was an RA for a year or so as well. I was also worked in the study abroad office. So I've seen a lot of different perspectives on this. And in me personally, I chose to do an academic exchange program because of the financial, like it was significantly cheaper than doing a third party program such as CEA or API, especially for a longer term, like a semester or a year. I chose to do a year actually because of the timeline in which I wanted to go abroad. I would have basically either had to skip a semester, or it was already going to be delayed in my graduation anyways. So I had to like either skip a semester or go for a full year in Germany. And because it was an exchange program, I was paying Stout tuition. So I was paying really similar to what I was paying to go to Stout. My biggest cost outside of that was my travel, and that I saved up for quite a while. So I ended up traveling to 12 countries while I was in Germany, and those were my biggest costs and expenses. In my faculty-led program, or not my faculty-led program, my exchange program, I used the same federal loans that I was already taking out to go to Stout. So for me, I didn't see a huge difference in like the amount of loans that I took out or whatever. I was already taking those loans out to go to Stout in the first place. So I might as well use those for study abroad anyways. My faculty-led programs actually were more of an additional expense on my everything than anything else. Like those to me were a little bit more expensive because I'm an in-state like student. So it was a little bit more expensive. But again, the return and like the value you get out of it is crazy. And where you go also really depends on that. My Mexico trip for 4 weeks was comparable to my 2-week trip in Holland, like price wise, but I got 2 whole weeks out of it and more credits and a more interesting experience. So it really, really depends on where you're going. And I also got scholarships. So I ended up getting a handful of scholarships for my trip to Germany. So that also helped in terms of financial costs. I got a few from the study abroad office, work study. I had all kinds of stuff. So the advisors at study abroad office know what they're talking about. The financial aid office knows how to help you. If it's a huge concern for you, and going to the financial aid office and figuring out all of your options is really a good idea. There's so many options, and I think people don't take enough advantage of the scholarship opportunities at Stout, especially for study abroad. It's crazy. There was a scholarship that I got that I'm pretty sure no one else got, and I've seen no one get it for a couple of years. So it's just like it's one of those things that you just have to look into and apply and do your research and get as much out of it. You get as much out of it as you put into it. So, yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I'll pause. I have a couple follow-ups on that, but I'll pause to see if anybody of our participants have any questions. Feel free to chat. Type it into the chat or turn on your microphone. Well, I was just going to add that I'm so glad that many of you talked about that financial aid is absolutely applicable. And also Jake's good suggestion about you can use a wind term or a summer program that typically, of course, are shorter. For those cases, typically the wind term program would qualify for the 3 credits to be able to do financial aid. For the summer, you do need to have 6 credits. But you can do that either if you're doing a combined program. Some of our faculty-led programs are based on 2 courses, so you would meet that 6 credit minimum, or you can also take another course online or in person over the summer as well to meet that 6 credit minimum. Also, since all you were here when I started working at this office, one of my first projects was to update our financing page. And so the list of scholarships is just incredible. I ended up having to organize it into categories because there are just so many. We also are seeing students a lot more now using crowdfunding sites. So there's a lot like GoFundMe, that type of thing, that students, especially if you know that you're going to study abroad early on, if you know that, you can set up an account and ask your friends or your family to give towards that savings instead of Christmas presents or birthday presents. So yeah, there are so many options, and the vast majority of students do not pay the entire ticket price out of their own pocket. It's through a combination of financial aid and grants and scholarships and savings. Any other questions from our attendees or Liz?
I was going to jump in here quick and say goodbye because I have to go to another meeting, and I know we're wrapping up here. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. The study abroad office knows how to contact me. I'm in touch with Andrea and everybody pretty regularly, or reach out to me on social media. I'm always around. You can find me at Megan Lutke. Yeah, anyways, this was fun, and I have to go jump to a team meeting. So I will see you guys there. Bye.
Thank you, Megan. All right. Well, any other final questions? Well, then, just to wrap up, I want to thank you all, especially our panelists, for joining us today, and those of you watching. Please do reach out and contact either our office, the Office of International Education. Right now, probably the best way to do that is by emailing us at studyabroad@uwstout.edu. Or if you have already some questions or things you want to talk about, perhaps the programs you're interested in, we encourage you to make a virtual appointment through the booking form that you see on this slide. And Liz, what are the best ways for people to reach your office right now?
Yeah, the best way is to either email, and it's just careerservices@UW-Stout, or you can call our office, and that extension is 1601. It's the rest of the numbers the same as everything else at Stout, but emailing's probably your safest bet.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and I hope that you'll check out our other live sessions today. Thank you.